Bullitt, under instructions from Roosevelt, was constantly urging the Poles not to make terms with the Germans, and Kennedy, under instructions from Roosevelt, was constantly urging the British to make guarantees to the Poles. Kennedy saw Chamberlain on numerous occasions, urging him, in Roosevelt's name, to do all this, with the implication that the United States would give the British support. After he had given Poland these guarantees, Chamberlain told Kennedy that he hoped the Americans would now be satisfied, that he had signed the doom of civilization. Had it not been for Roosevelt, the British would not have made this, the most gigantic blunder in history. We could not have imagined that England and France would start a war and then not come to our aid. Their interest in two fronts against Germany seemed indisputable. I asked Halifax how he felt about the whole thing. He said his feeling reminded him of a dream he once had in which he was being tried for murder. When he was finally convicted and found guilty, he was surprised at the feeling of relief that came over him. Now it was very much the same. The State Department has just heaved a big sigh of relief after terminating one of the most crucial episodes of international prodding in years. The objective of the State Department, or perhaps it is more accurate to say of the President himself, has been to push, goad, or cajole the British Empire. It is certain that the British government toyed with the idea of letting the Germans meet the Russians in an Eastern War, steering clear herself, just as it seems highly probable that the Russians, at the time of Munich, were not wholly averse to seeing an Anglo-French-German war, with Russia remaining out of it and prepared to bring everything into her own orbit at the end. This is a change from mediation to a decision to settle the international situation by force. This conditional declaration of war was made without anything in the nature of consultation or even the possibility of consultation with Canada or any of the dominions. Chamberlain felt it necessary, regarding Czechoslovakia, to say that we would have to fight for greater issues than the preservation of Czechoslovak borders or even the entire Czech nation. He now says Britain intends to fight for the preservation of Poland's borders and the preservation of that people. It is indeed a curious, sudden shift. In the event of any action which clearly threatened Polish independence, and which the Polish government accordingly considered it vital to resist with their national forces, His Majesty's government would feel themselves bound at once to lend the Polish government all support in their power. They have given the Polish government an assurance to this effect. A German-Polish deal would, in the long run, be highly disadvantageous to us. It would defeat the policy of forming a bloc against Germany. We are encouraging Poland to resist German demands, and in view of the importance to Poland, as much psychological as material, of the status of the Free City, we may be forced to support Polish rights in Danzig. Poland begins talks with Germans. Anti-aggression bloc hangs in the balance. Poland, reluctant to join Britain and France in a bloc against Germany, has started talks with the Germans to settle the future status of Danzig, it was learned last night. These conversations, it was understood, were intended by Warsaw and Berlin to attempt satisfaction for Germany's desire for greater authority over the Free City and at the same time guarantee Poland's economic interests there. The Prime Minister said that he was somewhat uneasy at the fact that our ambassador in Warsaw could obtain no information as to the progress of the negotiations between Germany and Poland. One possible, but very distasteful explanation of this was that Polish negotiators were, in fact, giving way to Germany. The Foreign Secretary said Ambassador Kennedy had received a message yesterday from Biddle, the American ambassador in Warsaw, to the effect that the Memel episode was giving credit to Ribbentrop, who was anxious to pull off another coup while this country and France were still discussing what action they should take, pointing out that Britain and France would fail to support Poland and that this failure would alienate American opinion from France and Britain. The Polish ambassador said that Poland, provided Britain was prepared to fight, would enter a full defensive alliance with Britain, similar to the Franco-Polish alliance. If Beck should leave Warsaw for London, that would be the signal that it had been possible to agree to make such an alliance. Beck would certainly not leave Warsaw for London unless and until all difficulties had been eliminated, and the signature of the Anglo-Polish alliance was in prospect. The Foreign Secretary said that he had been reflecting on the anxieties which had been voiced by the Minister for Coordination of Defense. He agreed that there was probably no way in which France and ourselves could prevent Poland from being overrun. We were faced with the dilemma of doing nothing or entering into a devastating war. If we did nothing, this would mean a great accession to Germany's strength and a great loss to ourselves of sympathy and support in the United States and in other parts of the world. If we had to choose between two great evils, he favored our going to war. It was difficult for me to judge what effect the conversation with Mr. Kennedy could have had on the position of Mr. Chamberlain, but I believe that it was not without meaning, since from what Bullitt told me, the British government was very much concerned with the American opinion and wished to maintain close relations with Washington. I was very pleased that Ambassador Kennedy's conversation with Chamberlain had led the latter to adopt a surprisingly firm stand on Danzig. There are rumors here to the effect that Ambassador Kennedy actually did talk with Mr. Chamberlain in recent days. It is asserted that he emphasized that America's sympathies for England in case of a conflict would depend to a great extent upon the determination with which England would take care of European states threatened by Germany. In order to strengthen the efforts of the American ambassador in London, I called the attention of Ambassador Bullitt to the fact that it is possible that the British may treat the efforts of the United States with contempt. He answered that I am probably right, but that nevertheless the United States has at its disposal the means to bring pressure on England. I asked Kennedy about the conversation which he is said to have had recently with Mr. Chamberlain concerning Poland. Kennedy was surprised and declared categorically that a conversation of such significance never took place. At the same time, and contradicting his own assertion, Kennedy expressed displeasure and surprise that his colleagues in Paris and Warsaw should talk so openly about this conversation. During a conversation with Ambassador Bullitt on the 24th of March, I stated that all diplomatic negotiations started by London would have no possibility of success so long as the British government decides not to accept definite and precise obligations. It is childish and criminal to hold Poland responsible for war or peace. It must be asserted once and for all that the responsibility rests principally with England and France. Ambassador Bullitt agreed completely with my views. The following day, the 25th, he informed me that, adopting my views and exercising the authority he was accorded, he had instructed the American ambassador in London, Joseph Kennedy, to call at the residence of Prime Minister Chamberlain and to repeat everything to him, emphasizing categorically the responsibility of the British government. Poland declining to enter a four-power Stop Hitler bloc without concrete military guarantees was regarded as speaking the opinion of several nations which might like to see Germany stopped but want the stopping done with something more than words. Poland's refusal to enter the bloc on the presently suggested basis was regarded as a severe and perhaps decisive blow to plans for an immediate anti-aggression declaration. Halifax felt that the inevitability of war sooner or later should be met right now. In light of the impressions left on his mind by his conversations with Ambassador Bullitt, it seemed to Ambassador Kennedy that considerable doubt emerged as to the willingness of Poland and Romania to defend themselves against German encroachment or attack, and he seemed to detect some doubt in many quarters as to whether those governments were likely to mean business and whether His Majesty's government and France really meant business. If we did not, the general effect of statements made during the last few days would be one of great disappointment. The British feel that Russia may go along with them, not to serve the general cause, but to serve whatever purpose they have in mind. If they do agree to go along with the French and the British, and if Romania and Turkey are prepared to fight, then England is advising France that they should both go to war regardless of Poland. I hate the thought of great powers being brought into wars over wretched little states in the Balkans. I cannot bring myself to feel that an alliance with Russia is anything other than very, very dangerous. I do not understand how the English have begun to lend themselves to it. The allying of so-called democratic nations against Germany and Italy is one of the things that is likely to bring on a major war. I had a long talk with Biddle, the American ambassador, who says he received a personal message from Roosevelt that the United States would support us to the last matchbox, and then the country would come to him. In effect, Roosevelt bluntly asked whether Britain was a national socialist nation or a democracy, and warned that the United States would watch Chamberlain's future policy for the answer. The United States ambassador asked me whether I could give him, in light of recent events, any indication of where we went next. American public opinion was profoundly shocked, and it was important that it should be protected from jumping to entirely wrong conclusions. There was evidence that the real danger consisted in the fact that so many people, well-intentioned but not well-informed, subconsciously believed that there was somewhere a perfect plan which would avoid all the evils of which they complained, and which would, incidentally, not involve war, but which the European democracies were either too short-sighted or too faint-hearted to put into operation. He feared that one reaction from them might be a greater accretion of strength to the anti-British sentiment in America, which would outweigh the feeling against the Germans, and this could hardly be more hostile than it was already. The reason for the British about-turn was because Chamberlain had received a message from Roosevelt. The president warned that Britain could expect no support from the United States, moral or material or through the sale of airplanes, if the Munich policy continued. What is remarkable is the promptness with which the government deemed the time had come to take extreme measures and proceeded to such a brutal reversal of British foreign policy. It was even within 48 hours, exactly between the 15th and 17th of March, that the reversal in question occurred. The British government will not be deflected from its pursuit of peace by yesterday's events in Czechoslovakia, Mr. Chamberlain declared in the Commons today. He refused to bring against Herr Hitler the charge of breach of faith, but what had taken place was not contemplated when the Munich Agreement was signed. We had a meeting in Halifax office to discuss our position. It was agreed we must make no empty threats, since we were not going to fight for Czechoslovakia any more than for Danzig, although we would fight for Switzerland, Belgium, Holland, or Tunisia. The League of Nations' failure to do all of what was hoped of it was the result of many large countries being outside of it, and the consequent unwillingness of its members to take vital risks for their people in causes which did not appear to a large proportion of their populations to be causes in which they were immediately concerned. That was the simple truth, and in admitting it, His Majesty's government were not more to be charged with disloyalty to the League than, for example, the pacifist was disloyal to his principles because he recognized the necessity in present circumstances of this country being rearmed. In my opinion, there was no occasion during the past few years when British policy on a major international issue could have followed a different line than it did, without the grave risk of that policy leading to a major European war. Ambassador Bullitt said, "Should war break out, likely we shall not take part in it at the beginning, but we shall finish it." According to Ambassador Bullitt, the above-mentioned attitude of official Washington circles is not based on ideological motives, but stems entirely from the necessity of defending the realistic interests of the United States. The United States has at its disposal many different and powerful means of pressure, and the threat to employ them would suffice to hold Britain back from a policy of compromise.